everybody. How are you? Thank you so much for coming. You all should be surfing or something. It's a beach community. I can't believe driving down from San Francisco. Anybody have their swim trunks on? All right, good. I hope you like banjos. Else, you're in the wrong place. Of a bluegrass banjo. That was a 1930 Gibson flathead Granada, as a matter of fact. Let's now move back about 100 years ago. I can't tell you how excited I am to be actually playing at the Museum of Musical Instrument Makers, because I can get like as geeked out as I can just talk about, you'll all be asleep soon. But let's go back 100 years. Was NAMM in existence in 1907? Probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were really? Wow. I'm just kidding. And this is a replica, and hopefully you've seen the exhibit. If not, see it during the break or after the show. I have almost all, I have a good sampling of the banjos that are in the cases, including that one right there, which they don't have. But this is a replica of an instrument that would have been popular in America, specifically in the Northeast, around the turn of the previous century. And the companies that were the primary makers were in Boston, Massachusetts, some of them were in Philadelphia. Builders such as the Vega Company and the Cole brothers. And this is actually a replica of a Vega banjo built by a Frenchman named Eric Stefanelli. And the style of music that was popular in, yeah, and hey John, I'm gonna be getting up and down and just keep this level the same, okay? And I'll talk really loudly and then we sit down and do the same. I forgot to tell him that. The style of banjo that was popular among some people in the early 1900s, we call classic banjo today. And it owes a great deal to ragtime. Ragtime music was the popular music of the early 20th century. Ragtime, of course, was created in 1898 with the publication of Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin. But Joplin was one of a group of African-American Midwestern composers composing in this style. Scott Joplin's mother played the 5-string banjo. And if you look carefully at the sheet music, you'll see in much piano ragtime the fixed left hand, the bass and chords, with the syncopated right hand. And those syncopations that Scott Joplin put to the music page in the very late 1800s came from earlier banjo styles, which we'll hear. It just made sense that as the ragtime era exploded all across America, that banjo composers, there were composers for this instrument, would write in a ragtime style. Here's a piece from 1908 by the American bandleader Paul Eno, who also played banjo, and it's called A Ragtime Episode. Another 60, 70 years, and in the front exhibit case of the Banjo exhibit is a real Buescher minstrel banjo that dates from the 1850s. This is a replica here that I'm playing for you, and the Buescher Banjo represents one of the first factory-made banjos in the United States. And the factory would have been made up of 6 or 8 people who tended to do slightly different things, but they all knew how to put the banjo together. Buescher was a drum builder. And the banjo was so popular in the 1850s along with the fiddle that drum builders were retooling their factories to make banjos right and left. And one way of looking at the banjo is it's a little more than a drum on a stick, or a stick on a drum. And so Buescher could simply just take this part, which he was used to making, and add a fancy neck and 5 strings, and he's got himself a banjo. In this earliest of American-made factory banjos, we have a blending of African and European elements that has been at the heart of the instrument in terms of both the instrument itself and the playing styles for 300 years. And it's the most American of instruments because of this, in my mind. The African elements are the stretched animal skin. And the top drone string is the highest pitched string on all of these banjos on stage, making it different from the tenor or plectrum banjos, which came later in the jazz age when players took the 5th string off to function more as a rhythm instrument in the jazz band. And so that high string on top, very percussive way of playing is a characteristic of the African way of playing the banjo. But we also have American or European elements in this instrument. We've got fancy fiddle tuners that are friction pegs, a fancy scroll headstock, and these curly cues on the neck are position markers. If I put my finger in the right place in line with my line of vision, I will hopefully be more or less in tune. You'll notice that there are no frets on this instrument. Frets were not popular on the banjo until the 1880s. It was a matter of much debate whether frets were actually good for the banjo. Of course, the advantage of no frets at all is I can play infinitely out of tune, which I will now demonstrate. We know quite a bit about the music of the mid-19th century on the banjo because instructional manuals were published that showed how to hold the instrument, how to tune the instrument, and presented pieces that would be played on the minstrel stage, but also were just simply popular pieces for all, including some instructions on what the right hand does and what the left hand does. We don't really know much about the performance context of this music, however. The minstrel shows were large auditoriums, no sound systems. We heard that often the audience would throw things if they didn't like the performers. That's your choice. We haven't gotten that far along in the show, so I would ask you to make up your mind a little bit later. So here is a medley of 3 Irish tunes. The right hand style in which the right hand moves across the string, definitely African derived. So we have this very American mixture of British Isles, in this case Irish melodic material, with a right hand approach from Africa. If you're a bluegrass player, you'll recognize the first tune. It's called Devil's Dream, or Fiddler. The second is St. Patrick's Day, and the third is Bully for All. kind music, music that will come right home to you like a bad quarter. Suffuse your system like strychnine whiskey, go right through you like Brandis pills, ramify your whole constitution like the measles, and break out on your hide like the pin feather pimples on a pickled goose. When you want all this, just smash your piano and invoke the glory-beaming banjo. Mark Twain, 1865. There's also one of these instruments in the exhibit. This is called an accounting, and it is a current present-day African instrument. So it's not really an example of the oldest instrument on the stage, because African folk instruments evolve just like manufactured instruments evolve. But of course, the banjo traditions up and down the western part of Africa go back hundreds of years. I've seen instruments in anthropological collections in museums that range in size from a sardine can with a short neck to a large hollowed out log for the body. That stretched animal skin is a characteristic, and usually many of these African banjos have the high string on top. The accounting was recently discovered by Western folks that were interested in the transmission of African ideas to the New World in what became the five-string banjo, and they became very excited about it because the playing style of the accounting today is very similar to the minstrel style and clawhammer or frailing styles today. The people that play this instrument are the Jola people of the Senegambia. They number 40,000. And in their oral history, extending back many, many generations, of course, are stories of their ancestors being forcibly exported to the New World. Many people ask me, how do I get all these banjos around? And I take them around in an SUV, drive all over the country, but I've had a hard time finding a case for this instrument. Now, since I'm at NAMM, maybe somebody can help me here. Maybe we need to make cases. And it just goes to show that there's no good case for accounting. I got to work on the setup of that joke. No accounting for good case. Is that better? All right. 3 strings. This is fishing wire. The way you tune this thing, because there's no tuners, is you get a knife or something and you kind of just go under the strings and you push down to make it flatter and pull towards you to make it sharp. That's all you need, really. This instrument is actually made by a man in Boston named Paul Sedgwick, who has been over to Africa many times and is a great player. But I'm going to play you just a few simple pieces on this instrument, beginner's pieces, so you can hear some of these transmission of playing styles and approaches towards music from Africa to the New World. I have to find my notes here. MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Several years ago in their math building, and in the central foyer of the math building is a enlarged photograph of the 1912 MIT Banjo Orchestra, numbering over 120 players. So the instrument manufacturers were doing something right in the early years of the 20th century, making banjos that ranged from little piccolo banjos to big bass banjos, some of them with 4 strings, some of them 5, and I can't imagine anything better than hearing a Beethoven symphony played on the banjo. If Beethoven had known about the banjos, he would have scored for that instrument. Well, wait a minute. So this is a new instrument made by the Gold Tone Company, Yo-Yo Ma's favorite banjo. This is the cello banjo. It's tuned a little bit lower. And I'll play a fiddle tune for you from West Virginia, and then we'll go over and play an Irish-inspired tune of my own composition. It's in the book Banjo for Dummies. As Mike was saying, it is in its 2nd edition. The first one was not dumb enough. And the second one has video and expanded sections on clawhammer and historical styles. But here's Glory in the Meeting House and Winston's Jig. The banjo at the North Pole. Excuse me, South Pole. When in 1914, Sir Ernest Shackleton embarked on his expedition to the Antarctic, he took in his party a young meteorologist, Leonard Husey. Husey was already accustomed to hardship and adventure, just having returned from a trip to the Sudan where he had gained the friendship of the Nyam Nyam tribe by playing his banjo for them. So when preparations were being made for the voyage to Antarctica, Husey took along his musical instrument as well as his meteorological instruments. During February 1915, the expedition's ship Endurance became completely icebound in the Weddell Sea. It was shortly after leaving the ship that I heard Shackleton calling for me, Husey's words. I've dumped something of yours, I've found something of yours, I've dumped it over there with the food stores. What's that, sir, I asked. Your banjo, replied Shackleton. It's rather heavy, I said dubiously. Do you think we ought to take it? Yes, certainly, was the chief's prompt answer. It's vital mental medicine, and we shall need it. Although Husey took along his banjo for the entertainment of his companions, some of his earlier audiences were flocks of Antarctic penguins. In Husey's words, when I played my banjo, they would listen attentively and appreciatively to some, but not all, of my music. They liked, for instance, Negro spirituals and Irish jigs. A strong favorite of which they never tired was It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary. But when I turned to playing Scottish music, well, they just fled. This is an English banjo that is the exact same model that Husey took along with him on the expedition ship Endurance. It's called a zither banjo. It looks quite a bit different than a lot of the banjos that are on the stage, and the English were trying to make the banjo respectable, so they were trying to disguise it as a guitar, basically. There's still a little bit of a skin head. Even the guitar tuning pegs kind of indicate, oh, this can't be a banjo. Well, tough luck, it is. And this is made by the Alfred Kmeyer Company. Kmeyer was a composer on the zither banjo, and he insisted that metal strings be placed on the first, second, and fifth strings, gut on the third, and a copper wound on the fourth to get the tones that he was interested in getting. The early 20th century was when the banjo became, kind of the reputation of the banjo was solidified, and it became known, as it is known today, as the instrument of love. Especially in Victorian society. These kinds of banjos were oftentimes played by the woman of the household, and of course you couldn't express your emotions directly in Victorian society, so if you were entertaining your gentleman friend on a Sunday afternoon over lemonade, you would bring out the banjo, and the underlying passion and raw carnality of the banjo would let your innermost desire be known. And in many cases, you never had to play the final section of a piece. There's no accounting for a good case. Is this thing on? So here's the kind of piece that would have been played on this zither banjo. Now, they were out on the ice for over a year, and this is the only entertainment that they had. It was pretty tough. This is called the Sunflower Dance. Oh, I know it. So, when you look at the minstrel style of banjo that I played on this instrument, and the classic style of banjo that I played on this instrument, and this piece I played on those instrument, that was written music, written in notation. I learned it by researching the music, finding it out, and just simply learning it. But other kinds of music, like folk music, are transmitted orally, by ear. And folks learned in small communities from one another, to where if you were living in an isolated place like the mountains of North Carolina, you might play banjo in a different way than the person just over in the other holler. When the record industry started putting out music with banjo players on it, that tended to nationalize styles to a certain degree. People would hear Uncle Dave Macon or Earl Scruggs on 78 RPM record or on the radio, and they would say, I'm going to learn how to play that. And so then you would get, you know, styles, somebody in Mississippi might know the same songs that somebody in North Carolina might know. Well, the 1920s was the decade that the recording companies discovered there was a market for rurally based music. That folks that lived in hollers in Virginia and Tennessee and Alabama had 78 RPM records, and they wanted music too that represented them, that they could find their own identity in. And the record companies would send A&R men, artist and repertoire men, to places like Bristol, Virginia, and Tennessee. Bristol is one of those towns where if you're sitting, you know, 1 foot on either side of the center line going through the street, you're in Tennessee and Virginia at the same time. Atlanta, Georgia, and they would take an ad out in the paper, usually a couple weeks ahead of time, saying we're auditioning talent for Victor Records, for Columbia Records, for Gannett Records, and we're paying $50 a side. Well, of course, that was a lot of money in the 1920s. And you might have heard that the Victor A&R man, a man named Ralph Peer, came to Bristol, Virginia, and in 1927 he discovered the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers on the same day in a furniture store in Bristol, Virginia. They walked in and auditioned, the first two icons of country music. And Maybelle Carter of the Carter family, the guitar-playing member of the Carter family, talked about the fact that this audition meant a whole lot to them. They didn't really imagine being professional musicians, but maybe record contract and the presence of 78 RPM records, it was a different career option. It was raining buckets on their journey from Mesa Spring, Virginia to Bristol, and of course there were back roads, many of them dirt roads in the 1920s, and they drove all night, and Maybelle talks about standing on the running board of the Model T with her sweater and towels and keeping the windshield free from the rain so that they could get there on time. And so folks like this really, this meant a lot to them. Another instrumentalist and singer who was recorded by a smaller company than Victor was an old-time banjo player from Southwest Virginia named Doc Boggs. And Doc was a coal miner. It is said that he wore his grandfather's Civil War uniform to the audition in New York City.